Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dee Dee Lageson, Executive Secretary for the Committee on the Present Danger China. We appreciate your interest in our weekly webinars in which we expose and analyze the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against America and the help being provided to the CCP in waging that warfare by captured U.S. elites. We encourage you to visit presentdangerchina.org for information on new programs, access to videos of our past webinars, and tons of other very valuable content. Please subscribe to our Substack at presentdangerchina.substack.com and follow us on X at CPD China. Our moderator today is Frank Gaffney. Frank is the president for the Institute for the American Future, vice chair of the Committee on the Present Danger China, and host of Securing America on Real America's Voice Network.
Welcome, everyone, to this edition of our webinar series featuring our analysis and our recommendations concerning the Chinese Communist Party and the war that it is waging against America. Unrestricted warfare, the pre-kinetic kind to this point, but quite possibly a shooting war in the not-too-distant future. We're going to be focusing today on one of the theaters in which the Chinese and its allies have been very much engaged in kinetic warfare. The Chinese, through their proxies, with their arms, with their financing, with their encouragement, to be sure, and with very devastating effects on the region, and particularly the interests of the United States, most especially in the security and safety of our friends and allies in Israel. We're going to be talking about who is likely to benefit most from a ceasefire agreement that has just been announced. As we host this event, it's a little unclear about its status. The government of Israel has said that the Hamas negotiators are now backing and filling, adding new demands. This is, as we'll hear, not unprecedented. The government of Israel, as a result, has not brought the fact to the Israeli Security Cabinet or the full cabinet for their approval, nor taken it to the Knesset for a final vote. That may be in the offing shortly, but as of now, it is in a state of suspended animation, shall we say, which personally, I will say, I think is a very good thing. I hope it remains there because I believe this accord, this ceasefire agreement, as we will hear, is deeply problematic, again, both for Israel and her people, and I think for the United States and its interests in the region and beyond, not least because of the benefit that might accrue to our enemies and Israel's as a result. We'll be talking about all of these topics and also a role played by one of the principal mediators in all of this, the nation of Qatar, what it has been doing both in the course of these mediations as well as to support and enable the Sharia supremacists of Hamas and in other countries that are, again, a very serious threat to the people of Israel and to us. All of this is going to be brought to you in the course of the next hour or so by some of the best people we have the privilege of working with, and I'm very proud to introduce the first of them, again, no stranger to these programs and many others that we're involved with at our new Institute for the American Future and various coalition efforts that it is supporting, including notably one we call the Victory Coalition. His name is Dr. David Wormser. He is a senior analyst with the Center for Security Policy and directs its Middle East programs. He has extensive experience as a naval intelligence officer and in roles as an assistant for the Middle East to an undersecretary of state, national security advisor, and a vice president of the United States.
I'm going to take a little bit of a step back from this and deal with a number of the issues. But first of all, I'm taking a step back not because I don't think the particulars of the deal are awful. They are. I mean, there really is no redeeming feature to the deal other than the redemption of the 33 souls in the first phase. It could be brought back, and many of those, unfortunately, are probably already dead. From everything I'm hearing, the Israelis estimate that at least 10 of them are dead. And there could be more, and Hamas had an ominous statement this morning that Israel's bombing has killed more hostages. So we really don't know how many are coming back alive, and I think that was one of the most psychologically devastating elements of this deal, is that the Israelis will not know who's coming back alive until the ambulance pulls up, and whether somebody steps out who's alive or dead, or a box coffin. It's just one last form of torture. Hamas refuses to tell Israel, even in the first iterations, of who's alive and who's dead. So that's number one. But the deal has many big problems. But let me take a step back and say where, when we can argue, there are people who will say, listen, the 33 people, Israel has to get them back. And others will say, yes, but this is going to cost hundreds, if not thousands, of Israeli lives in the future and so forth. I'll leave that for further discussion in this panel. I feel that it's a very difficult deal in that way, and I agree with the opposition. And second of all, those who will say that this is another deal where the left in Israel is sort of steamrolling over the right and is not taking seriously. Even if you agree with the deal, you need to go to the people in Israel who are against the deal and say, listen, we understand, you're right. We feel what you feel. We're horrified, but ultimately it's a consequence of October 7th and the failure of the IDF in the last 14 months to be more aggressive and finish the job, and the Biden administration tying both hands behind Israel's back. They have to go to the people who oppose this deal otherwise and tell them, we know what you're saying and we agree. Otherwise, there's a permanent scar left in Israeli society, very much like the Oslo Accords and the disengagement left. But let me pull back for 1 second. What really worries me about this deal, and it's why I think Smotrich, the partner in Bibi's coalition, is doing what he's doing. And what he's doing is he's saying, I oppose this deal. I understand you need to have good relations with the Trump administration. And I also don't want to bring down the government. But I can't live with the deal as is. So I need a guarantee that you will restart the war after the first phase. Why restart the war? Because it makes the deal reversible. And what is it that makes him so insistent on it being reversible? Well, because this deal is an embodiment of the Biden administration's concept of this conflict, which is leveraging the hostages to secure an Israeli lack of victory, or I could be less gracious and call it to secure that Israel comes out of this war not strong or even defeated. Survive, but defeated. Because at the core of the Obama and Biden administration's idea is a strong Israel is not an Israel that makes peace, and that therefore it's not really in America's interest to have Israel be too strong. So it didn't want Israel to emerge out of this the way Israel emerged from 1967, and it leveraged the hostage crisis, essentially to force on Israel the acceptance of a strategic defeat. And that's the parameters of this deal. If this deal is implemented as is all the way through, and remember, Hamas's obligations are essentially just to release the bodies of the hostages. If it goes all the way through, Israel has suffered a significant strategic defeat. It does not come out of this war looking victorious, because Gaza, at the end of 15 months of facing the Israeli army, will be entirely under Hamas's control. Hamas will be the government, and they will have easy access with no border control anymore that's effective to Egypt. So we're returning everything back to October 6th, waiting for the next October 7th, probably on steroids. In addition to the costs of the thousands, and I mean thousands, of terrorists that are going to be released into Judea and Samaria during this deal, which ensures that the next war, Judea and Samaria, is part of it fully. So if it goes all the way through and it isn't reversed, that is the consequence, and that is the deal, the framework. And that's why I was a bit frustrated that Witkoff, the emissary from Trump, was sent to negotiate the deal under the framework of the Biden framework, rather than wait till Monday and simply use the leverage of Trump's ultimatum to turn to the Hamas people and say, listen, you blew it. You had your chance under Biden. You didn't give up the hostages. Now it's our turn, and you're not going to get the same deal. And we have a different strategic view, which is that Israel's actually an ally. We're not a mediator between two sides. We are Israel's ally, and Israel needs to win this war, and you need to lose. So, and then a deal emerges on that basis, probably on better terms. So for me, it was a fundamental mistake even sending Witkoff. But okay, now to take a step back, what are the tectonics here, and why does it absolutely have to be reversed? Israel learned its lesson. Its military is remobilizing and modernizing. It's not the same military as October 7th. It can handle Hamas if it tries to do what it does. The reason why that is not a good argument is because the tectonics have shifted. Embedded in that is this idea that, look, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, they've been horribly defeated by Israel's strategic victory in the region. Iran is gone. It is on its way out and will hopefully fall soon. It's not the regional power it was a year ago. So it's orphaned, but it isn't, because Hamas has already shifted. It is now the proxy of Turkey and Syria and the Muslim Brotherhood in the region. It always had two masters. It has now settled on the Turkish master. It is a strategic threat to Israel by the new Nasser, or the new axis, emerging against Israel, which again brings that axis into the heart of Israel and 20, 30 miles south of Tel Aviv as a dagger into the most populated sections. So Israel really can't live with the reemergence of Gaza, of Hamas under Gaza. It really cannot countenance the survival of Hamas, and it can't countenance the danger emerging here. The Qatar plays such an outsized role again in Washington, and unfortunately, Witkoff's intervention and mediation had all the paw prints of Qatari manipulation. And either, the administration really has to shove Qatar aside and set American priorities on other allies in the region, including UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, and not Qatar. Qatar, at the end of the day, is not the head of the snake, but it's the brain of the snake, whether it's the Iranian snake and now it's the Turkish snake. It is really the brain. It is the nervous system and the funding structure. So I think that Qatari issue has to be dealt with. At any rate, I don't want to monopolize too much time. I'd rather give some to question and answers and so forth. But just suffice it to say that Israel has a fundamental interest in winning this war, and in my view, having to reoccupy Gaza until it's all cleaned out and its population is changed in terms of its mentality, which will take years and years and years. It's not something that can happen in a week or two. Perhaps with some intervention of Saudis and others. But at this point, Israel needs to reoccupy Gaza, expunge it entirely, completely eradicate Hamas's presence and influence there, and the Qatari, Turkish, Iranian, residual, whatever influence that's there. Also, by the way, Egypt is very worrisome, so you also don't want to add one more thing to the southern front in Israel. But at any rate, so I leave it at that, and that's why I think Smotrich's demand that Israel must be able to restart this war and finish the job fully and properly under Trump, when they have no more shackles and no more both hands tied behind their back and no more demands for overwhelming humanitarian aid that keeps Hamas alive and funded, and Israel can go all the way and finish it finally. So I think if that's where the administration winds up in a few weeks, it'll be bad, this deal, but it will be survivable, and maybe a few people come out alive.
Thank you very much. Excellent overview and introduction to the larger topic here of who benefits. It's clear that Israel will not, and I would argue neither will we. It sets up nicely our next presentation. Lee Smith is also, I believe, very well known to our audience, partly because of his extraordinary books, the most recent of which is The Disappearing President, Trump, Truth Social, and the Fight for the Republic, but also his running analysis and commentaries, notably at Tablet Magazine. Lee is an extraordinarily formidable public intellectual and journalist, I guess one might say, in the best sense of the word, on both the fronts that we're talking about here, China, and also the Middle East. And we're very privileged to have him here to talk about the implications of this ceasefire deal, both for Israel, for the region, and for the broader American interests, notably with respect to the Chinese Communist Party. Lee Smith, thank you so much for finding a few minutes to talk to us. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Frank, for inviting me, and pleasure to be on such a great panel and speaking in front of such a great audience. I wanted to say something that I think is significant about getting out of the deal right now, the ceasefire deal. The deal was structured by the Biden team and the Qataris, and those of you who followed the Iran nuclear deal, the JC, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, will recognize that it's a staged deal. Right, which means that while phase one begins with the release of the first hostages on Sunday, the negotiations are ongoing. Right. And so that means that the incentive is to stay in negotiations. So while different policymakers, Americans, like National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and others are saying, don't worry, we can go back and go after Hamas if they start acting up. It's like, no, they can't, because the incentive is to stay in the deal. And so that will allow things that will be described as minor infractions, like Hamas rearming. So all the incentive right now is because the Trump administration has invested its prestige in this deal. So what's going to happen is that, in effect, the Trump administration will be serving as Hamas's lawyer. And so once this deal kicks in, that's it. For the Trump administration to leave this deal will require something nearly equivalent to October 7th. Aside from that, though, this deal is it. So if the Israelis accept it, that's it. It was structured not by the Trump team. It was structured by the Biden team. Why the Trump team has done this, I mean, there's lots of questions, and we can talk about that later. Daniel wrote a very interesting thread that is followed about the number of trips that Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff took to Qatar, which I find fascinating, because what happened is Witkoff was sent to sit on Bibi and make Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and make him accept the deal. Right. So the question then is that maybe Daniel can answer when he comes up shortly is, well, so if the job was to force the Biden deal on the government of Israel, why did the Middle East envoy have to keep going to Qatar? The job was simple. Right. Here's what the Biden deal looks like. Make a few phone calls. And here's your plane ticket. Go sit on Bibi and scream at him for however long it takes for him to take the deal. Instead, he visited Doha, which is very curious. I do not think that Qatar is the major player that many have made them out to be. It would be quite easy for everyone for a Democratic or Republican administration to knock Qatar down to size, but they have lobbying on their behalf the largest bureaucracy in the world, and that is the Pentagon. So, I mean, I just do not see Qatar as a big problem. Any White House could deal with this problem quite easily. They've chosen not to, and it's not hard to see why, because Qatar distributes a tremendous amount of cash around Washington, D.C. Again, I don't think the fundamental problem here is Qatar, though I do think it's curious why Witkoff kept going to Qatar. Look, the big thing that's happened here, the larger strategic picture, I believe, is that Donald Trump entered the White House in somewhat spectacular position. And that is that the Iranians and their proxies had been done suffered terrible blows, right? And then when Turkish-backed Sunni fighters, HTS, took over Syria, what that meant was that Iran lost its supply line to Hezbollah. This was terrible for Iran. And Donald Trump, when he came to office, when he appointed National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, he said, yeah, Waltz is great. He's going to help confront our main three threats here, China, Russia, and Iran. And I liked how that was couched because it seemed to me that the president-elect understood that this is a bloc, right? It's not just China and Russia and Iran are threats, but it's a bloc, right? Remember that they were conducting naval exercises recently. I'm sure David can remember the exact date, but recently in the Gulf of Oman. So insofar as these were major American problems, this was the most formidable threat to American interests, China, Russia, and Iran. Trump was going in with Iran much weaker, also Russia much weaker as well. And Trump said this on his Truth Social feed. He was talking about how Russian forces had been in Syria and they got badly hurt, the Russians who had been killed in Ukraine. So it looked like Donald Trump was walking into a fantastic situation here, right? Because what did he talk about? He talked about peace in the Middle East. He talked about peace in Eastern Europe. So here he's going in because of Israel and to a lesser extent Turkey. He walks in with leverage, not just on Iran, but on Russia as well. So, and therefore, to a large extent, China. Remember, he mentioned China in these posts. He said, yeah, Xi can help as well when he's talking about brokering peace in Eastern Europe. So what has happened? So what this deal means, we understood this with the Biden administration. The Biden administration was loath to see part of the Iranian access to Iran's regional architecture collapse. And that's why they wanted to save Hamas. And that's why they wanted to save Hezbollah. And that's why they also tried to save Assad before HTS knocked out Assad. So why has Donald Trump done what Republicans criticized Joe Biden for trying to do? This is a crucial question, and I'm sorry to say I don't have any good answers yet. I think that people are shaking their heads, both in Washington as well as Jerusalem. And there are probably American allies all around the world who don't quite understand what's happened here. They certainly understand. I'll just say one last thing briefly, and that is, look, we understand that the president-elect wanted a big achievement before he even walked into the White House, something to celebrate the day of the inauguration. But I'm just the deal itself, the nature of it, doesn't look good. Because remember, Donald Trump's opening bid was, as he laid out on a social media post, all the hostages must be returned. Viewers inferred that he's referring to all the hostages. And what was the counteroffer of a Palestinian terror group? No. How about 33? And a lot of them are going to be dead. How's that? Okay, great. That's the deal we're going to take. So you don't have to look very closely at the details of the deal to see that there's lots of ways that it doesn't look good for the incoming administration, doesn't look good for the president-elect. And there's lots more ways this can go wrong, as Dave was talking about. I mean, goodness only knows. I mean, God forbid what we're going to see Sunday. People will start getting a pretty good idea of who's still alive, who is not alive, and there's likely to be wails and lamentations from the West Coast of the United States all the way around the world. So I have to say I don't understand it, but that's the strategic layout as far as U.S. interests are concerned. That's how I read it in terms of Donald Trump's own prestige and for Israel as well. This deal is not something that they're going to be able to. Remember what they said about the JCPOA. Well, we can snap back sanctions at any time. But of course, that was just another one of the talking points. So that's what we have here, too. The deal is structured. The deal is designed so that Israel cannot leave, so that Israel cannot retaliate, cannot respond, because they'll be seen as the deal breaker, and that will damage the prestige already invested in making this deal. So thanks again, Frank. Thanks to all.
Lee, thank you. Very, very important assessment of what's happened here. And I can't disagree with much. We will explore a little bit further the role of Qatar and what importance one might assign to it in all of this. And as you've indicated, we're going to hear next from a man who's been studying it closely and reporting on it, as he has on all aspects of the deal and the context in which it's been struck, and more generally, U.S. foreign policy interests and the Trump agenda for advancing them. That would be Daniel Greenfield. He's the executive vice president of a wonderful organization, the David Horowitz Freedom Center. He is a columnist for Front Page Magazine and very prolific at that. He is also an author of a number of books, including most recently Domestic Enemies, The Founding Fathers Fight Against the Left. We've asked Daniel to take a look at the kind of history here of the Obama-Biden subversion, I think it's fair to say, of Trump's agenda back in 2017 initially, 2016, the end of 2016 technically, and today, and whether what Americans have voted for is what is now in prospect, and if not, again, who benefits? Daniel, welcome back once again. It's great to have you with us, sir. The floor is yours.
My pleasure. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Lee, for the mention as well. Obviously, the deal itself is catastrophic. I don't think anybody here in particular disagrees about that. People are very much focused, of course, on the immediacies and what they're calling phase one, the exchange of hostages, the details of that. I want to pull back for a bit of a bigger picture as well. So an important thing to understand is, yes, this is the immediacies, the exchange of hostages, the release of thousands of terrorists. That is just a preamble. The larger goal, obviously, first of all, is to suppress further Israel efforts to fight against Hamas. But there is a bigger agenda here because we have to discuss where this plan came out of. Yes, it officially came out of the Biden administration, but it has a larger life beyond that. So what is the end game for this? So we already know some of the end game for that, which is the creation of a so-called technocratic Palestinian state in which the PLO and Hamas will run it, in fact, behind the scenes. But out front, there will be a number of employees of NGOs, of organizations, world bankers, so on and so forth, to create this illusion of a technocratic government. The Palestinian Authority or the PLO have been using these people as props, as prime ministers for a while now. The next step will be to create this technocratic government that of these people who will be out front. They will be there collecting foreign aid. The United States of America, that means the Trump administration, under this deal will be tasked with really leading up the reconstruction of Gaza. Qatar will be taking point. Now, where did this unity agreement for this terror state, technocratic terror state, come from? So Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the PLO, a number of other groups have been meeting under the aegis of China and Russia in capitals in Beijing and Moscow to hammer out this unity deal. So the end game for this is a government, a terrorist state, funded by the United States to be recognized by the UN that actually has been shaped by China and Russia. So this is the Committee on the Danger of China. China has very much been behind this, and their goal is fundamentally to replace an American ally, Israel, with a Chinese ally. One that will be a terrorist organization that will be beholden to Iran, that will also be beholden to Russia and China. This was the arrangement that was advanced by the Biden administration. Knowingly or unknowingly, we must assume that people in the Biden administration were perfectly aware of how this was playing out and made assorted excuses such as, we have to exercise our influence, otherwise China will be entirely in control of the so-called unity government. In reality, the unity government was not even negotiated under American auspices. It was negotiated under Chinese and Russian auspices, which means what's being signed off on now, this pathway to a Palestinian state, one that Secretary of State Blinken very much emphasized in his farewell address, in which he blasted Israel and once again called for this terrorist state, is one that's going to be there to eliminate America's presence in the Middle East. It's part of this long game that has been played by Russia and more recently by China to push America out of the region. Iran has been one of their best tools for doing that. They've had other tools, and the Palestinians' entire identity that was created by Soviet propagandists back in the day was their ultimate vehicle for doing this. And that is the long game in what we're dealing with here. The long game has been to push America out of the Middle East, to further isolate America and to destroy it. So the entire vector here has been to build Russian and Chinese influence in the Middle East. Now, Russia has taken quite a beating after what happened in Syria, but China is much more interchangeable. It's much less wedded to any particular entity. And China sees this as an opportunity to break America and break America's presence in the Middle East. So the Trump team, or at least people in the Trump team, because there are major questions about this. The stories describe Witkoff coordinating closely with Qatar. We mentioned that briefly in my Twitter thread. They don't really describe coordination with Trump or let alone the Trump team, because there is an extensive team now coming into place. Witkoff does not seem to have been coordinating with them, and that obviously raises major questions, questions which we're going to continue to look at. Because Qatar has its own agenda. Qatar is a state sponsor of Hamas, and the Muslim Brotherhood is using soft power to gain its own dominance in the region. It's a pretty small but very wealthy power. It's closely allied with Iran, and its expertise is really subverting Americans in particular. It doesn't have nearly as much influence in Europe as it does in America, which is a major issue right there. Now, the Trump administration is going to be wedded to this plan, as we mentioned. It's going to be wedded to a plan, first of all, restraining Israel from doing anything against Hamas, doing anything in Gaza, because that would shatter the legitimacy of the deal. So what Biden's people did, and those are the same people as Obama's people did, was they took this deal, a deal that had really come as much out of Russia and China as out of America. They took this deal, they smuggled it over into Trump's people, and they got a Trump person to go ahead and endorse this deal, and they got Trump to go ahead and endorse this deal. And the latter part is particularly catastrophic, because it's one thing if Witkoff had just done this on his own, which really it appears for the most part he was doing. That would be bad enough, but it would be reversible. Having the President of the United States, the President-elect, lend this prestige to this is really bad. It sends a number of messages. And those implications extend far beyond that of Israel. It has major implications because it sends the message to America's allies. What it sends the message to is that the United States cannot be trusted as a partner. This is particularly crucial as China appears to be moving toward an invasion of Taiwan. And right now it's trying to intimidate Taiwan with shows of force and with the underlying message that America is not a trusted or reliable ally, which means it's better to make a deal with China under some sort of farce of one country, two systems, the same thing that they pulled with Hong Kong. Now, Taiwan, obviously other countries are looking at what's going on in Israel, and they're seeing that not only the old administration, but the new one has sold out a close ally yet again. And the message that's sent there as a result is that they should make a deal with China. They should make a deal with Iran. They should make a deal with America's enemies, because it is not a good thing to be our ally. It is not a good thing to be our friend. And that is the larger geopolitical game here, because it's not just about Israel. Israel is a very small country. It's rather crucial because it's the most reliable ally that America has in the Middle East. This is not just aimed at Israel. Yes, there are people who hate Israel, but this is aimed at America. It's aimed by the Obama team. It's aimed by China at destroying America's influence, America's power and authority in the Middle East. And this is something that the Obama team had started from the very beginning. There's a reason that Democrat administrations have been obsessed with creating a so-called peace deal in the Middle East. Not a peace deal like the Abraham Accords, but a peace deal specifically one that creates a Palestinian terror state. They've done it because their goal was to weaken America. Weakening Israel was their means of weakening America. Obama was more explicit about this in some ways, particularly with the Iran deal, emphasizing that the goal was to reverse past American foreign policy to create this new Middle East. But the reality is that this is still the agenda that was at play in the Biden administration. Whether or not Biden understood this or was aware of this, and likely he was not, because his awareness at this point is rather limited. So when the Trump team adopts this, one, they are taking the fall for a policy that is fundamentally anti-American. It is not America first. It is not peace through threat. It is war through weakness. It picks up exactly where the Biden team left off, which is the worst possible place that any America First policy should pick up. And it raises larger concerns because during the first Trump term, we had a situation where we had people who were Obama holdovers or people who were pursuing those policies, even if they weren't officially holdovers, who came into the administration, they came into the Pentagon, they came into the National Security Council, they came into the State Department, and they made sure that those agendas continued to be pursued even while Trump got the responsibility and the blame for it. It is crucial that this not happen again. What we've been hoping for is a clean house, a house that is actually going to be dedicated to the agendas, the positions, the principles that Trump laid out of making America strong. This particular deal makes Israel weak, but it also makes America weak. It rewards the terrorists. It rewards also America's enemies, both within and without it. It rewards those enemies within the Biden administration, within the Obama administration, who pursued these policies to begin with. It rewards China's goal of making America weaker internationally. And it makes war more likely, not only war in the Middle East, because we understand perfectly well that Hamas, its leaders have come out and said that they view this as a victory and they're going to continue their attacks. It emboldens Iran after Iran took some severe beatings in recent months. It also emboldens Turkey and various other foes, but it also emboldens conflicts around the world. It makes it more likely that China will go into Taiwan. It makes it more likely that conflicts will begin and continue around the world, because when Trump came out and said that there will be all hell to pay, that was a very impressive statement. It was a statement that said that America needs to be taken seriously. And that is the best way to avoid conflicts. There are people who think in isolationist terms where they're thinking that weakness is the best way to avoid conflicts. Pulling back and getting away from things is the best way to avoid conflicts. And that's not the actual way to do this. The motto of the Strategic Air Command back in the day was peace is our business, because projecting force means that you're less likely to have to use it. That's why Putin only invaded Ukraine under Obama, under Biden, under administrations that he knew were weak. And it is crucial that the Trump administration not signal weakness to the world, because if they signal weakness, we will actually face wars. And the best way to avoid that is to stop making bad deals. Bad deal is worse than no deal at all. It is to stop sending the message that America is in there to do the same kind of business that we've done all along. People voted for Trump because they wanted an end to the usual way of doing business. What we need now is an end to the usual way of doing business for Americans, for our allies, and for the entire world, because stability is not going to come from pursuing the same failed policies of the Biden administration. It's going to come from a new order. Thank you for listening.
What a fantastic presentation, Daniel. Thank you. You speak faster than I can listen, I have to say, but what I caught of what you said is...
I'm sorry.
No, you're fabulous, and it's so impressive, each and every word, and I'm anxious to have our team have some give and take about it all. Before we do, though, we have one final presentation by our friend Trevor Loudon, one of our regulars, I'm proud to say, a very important member of our Committee on the Present Danger China, and a fellow of our senior fellow of our Institute for the American Future, as I think is Daniel Greenfield as well, now that I think of it. We're very appreciative of all of our team, but Trevor has tasked with the research a bit further into Qatar and the role that was played in all of this by that nation, and more broadly in the capture of American elites, something that those of you who've been following these webinars know is a very, very widely practiced habit of the Chinese Communist Party. As each of our previous speakers has alluded to, it's been practiced with considerable effect by Qatar as well. We're anxious to, if we can, further understand, further illuminate what exactly Stephen Witkoff was up to with the Qataris, the extent to which it had a profound impact, perhaps, on the shape of this deal, and where we go from here. Trevor, thank you again for joining us. Thank you for all the work you've done about what we call enemies within, and in particular for taking this particular topic as a research task for the purpose of helping us illuminate it here. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Frank. Well, the Qatari Prime Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman, recently credited Stephen Witkoff with forcing the deal. It is very clear that they believe that Witkoff was the one who forced, so far, Bibi Netanyahu into acquiescence. Witkoff is one of many Americans who have done business deals with the Qataris in recent time. Even Pam Bondi, the upcoming Attorney General, worked for Qatar for a short time. And I'm not necessarily criticizing her at all. I think she'll make a fine Attorney General. But this is Qatar, for its size and influence, has had massive influence on this country as a stalking horse for the Muslim Brotherhood, but I believe as a stalking horse for Iran and China and Russia as well, because I agree with both Lee and Daniel that we have to treat those three countries as a bloc and we have to treat Hamas and Hezbollah and Qatar and Venezuela and Cuba and North Korea as appendages to this bloc. And we must understand what they're doing is in furthering the interests of this bloc. Witkoff sold his Park Lane hotel to Qatar in 2023 to the Qatari Investment Authority, a government body, for $623 million. And there's quite a lot of speculation or a lot of information out there that it was really a forced sale. That if this sale hadn't gone through, Witkoff could have been in major trouble. And so you could say, well, does he owe Qatar? Is he indebted to Qatar? You know, he's visited there many times. He was at the 2024 Qatar Economic Forum, where he praised Qatar for what they're doing. He's talked about the Qatari influence in the Middle Eastern peace deal as God's work. There's no doubt that he is pretty partisan when it comes to this, and is as much an enforcement mechanism for Qatar, I think, as he is for the Trump administration. So the perception alone is horrific. You know, the fact that Trump's envoy to the Middle East has known ties to Qatar, even if they have not influenced him one iota, must send terrible messages to Israel and any other American ally out there. And I will say, I'll go a little bit further than some. I think there is definitely an element that is influencing the Trump administration, and I put Tucker Carlson right at the center of this, who is very militantly pro-Russia and very strongly anti-Israel, who is trying to maneuver Trump's foreign policy away from the standard America First into this new paradigm where Israel can be downgraded, Ukraine can be bartered away, or large chunks of Ukraine can be bartered away to Putin, all of which I think will be completely disastrous. As Daniel said, this will encourage China's adventures against Taiwan. It will encourage other bad actors around the world to do all sorts of stuff. Even, the Hezbollah and the Hamas people that are now currently in Latin America. We need to understand that, yes, I believe that China greenlighted the October 7th attacks on Israel, but it's Hamas called Russia its best friend, not Israel, not China. They called Russia is our best friend. Leading Hamas leaders were in Russia 3 days before the Hamas attack, and were in Russia and Moscow 4 times in the previous 2 years. So, and we got to understand, I believe that Russia had a big interest in the October 7th attack as well, because their war in Ukraine was bogged down, not going very well at all. And they were waging a big war in American public opinion to take support away from Ukraine, and an attack on Israel suited their purpose by diverting attention and giving the pro-Russia party in America an excuse to say, well, look, we've got to forget about Ukraine. We need to focus now on Israel, our great ally. So Israel is really caught in a huge bind here. I think the only way out of this mess is a strong Trump foreign policy, a turnaround, and the deal with the hostages should be, let all the hostages go and some of you may live, meaning Hamas. That's the only deal that should be made here. This is snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. It's setting the Trump administration on the completely wrong path right from the word go. And I think every responsible national security person should be raising hell about this. And trying to stop this deal, trying to stop it stone cold, because it's going to bounce back on Trump. It's going to bounce back on America. It's going to damage Israel immensely. And as Daniel said, it is part of the Russian, Chinese, Iranian plan to set up a new state, a new Palestinian state, when Israel was on the verge of eliminating that possibility. I think it's bad all round. I think it's a combination of Russia, China, and Iran, and bad actors in the American system who are more favorable to Russia and Palestine than they are to Israel and Ukraine. I think that is what is behind this seemingly illogical adventure by the Trump administration.
Trevor, thank you. This has been a fantastically interesting discussion to this point. We have some time for some give and take with you all, if you're game to stay with us. This is a moment when I think our presenters have made powerful arguments against the deal. And I guess, David Warnzer, I would come to you. What are the prospects that it will founder at this point? You have opined, I think here and certainly elsewhere, that once the comments that were made by Mike Waltz were out, that actually the Trump team is going to be fully on board with Israel finishing the job in Gaza. They began what they do so well, which is backing and filling and saying, no. Might we be spared this disastrous ceasefire deal, do you think?
I think that the deal isn't done till it's after it's implemented, not even as it starts being implemented. Anything can go wrong, even if, first of all, from what I understand, there still are a few issues. And, you're dealing with not only evil people, but a different culture, and what their way of negotiating in America is principals get together, they come to a deal, or don't come to a deal, but they come to a deal, they shake hands and they say, we got all the skeleton of the deal, even some of the flesh on the deal, but then they turn to their staff and they say, okay, you work out the details, it's going to be signed on Tuesday rather than Wednesday. I'm a CEO, I don't deal with stuff like that. But in the Middle East, it's the details that matter, because nobody says no. They say, I agree with you. The deal is, I want the deal. I agree with the deal. But then they throw millions of details out to derail the deal if they don't want it. And I think we're seeing part of that. And part of it is to humiliate and torture Israel and America and cause a roller coaster, because you're dealing with people who on 3 a.m. get called and say your child is being released likely on Sunday, and then at 5 a.m, well, there may not be a deal, and then at 7 a.m, your child's going to be released on Friday. Yeah, this is just intentional, sadistic, psychological torture that we're engaging in here, rather than, and again, this goes back to the core, which is, it should have just been clean on Monday, give them up. Israel might want to pay a little bit of a price for that, but just give them all up. And then we move on to get rid of Hamas. Why did Israel go for this? Well, one, it's obvious that the hostages are hostages, and there is agony in Israel. Second of all, I don't think Netanyahu wants to be seen as one who wrote off the life of anybody he could have saved. There's a lot of political, but also personally, I think that it does matter to Israelis. But I think there's also something else, and that's why, again, returning to it, I agree with Lee. This is very dangerous, because like the JCPOA, it does lock Israel into a structure where they have to violate. My sense is every single step, every single release, every single move in this first 42 days is going to be haggling until it happens. And at any point, Israel should just say, we're done with this haggling. We agreed to everything. You're going back. We're done. And start the war again. The key is it needs the Trump administration behind it. And the Trump administration needs to get behind it to understand strategically the deal is dangerous for the Trump administration, for the American interests, and for Israel. So that's the key. Why would Israel also accept the deal, by the way, right now? One is the war's about to shift to the West Bank, to Judea and Samaria. And Netanyahu, Israel's military is stretched. People have done reserve duty for 200 plus days a year. Equipment is really down to the wire. American embargo on Israel is continuing to this moment, will continue until 12:01 on Monday. And Israel has critical needs like tractors and spare parts and bombs and so forth. So the Israeli military really needs to repair itself and get ready, first of all, for the war in Judea and Samaria, which is coming literally as we speak, and then turn back to Gaza, and that will take several weeks. So there's a kind of a natural pause in what Israel's doing. And the second thing is Israel needs a new general staff. Like the United States, it is a military run by officers who do not know what it means to seize territory and hold, do not know what it means to win a war. They believe in war as a negotiating tactic, not as an element or an instrument of victory and national interest. So Israel needs a new staff. So my sense, the next week you will see weapons flowing. The Israelis start the war in Judea and Samaria. Reserve units are pulled off the line, repairs, and then finally firing of the chief of staff and several other officers and replacing with far more aggressive staff. And then Israel circles back in 6 weeks to finish the job. And that's essentially where I think the Israelis are headed. The key is the United States has to understand that's what's going on and see it as in its interest, that that's what it needs to do, so that what Lee raised of our reputations on the line, we don't want to, this is not, America can say we got out 30 hostages, whatever. The most important thing right now is this war ends in a victory for the right side.
David, thank you. This is really important, and we'll talk a bit more about it in a moment. But Lee has had to leave, I'm afraid. So, Daniel, this question is to you. I believe it was you who said that there is evidence that Witkoff was really not working with others on the incoming Trump team. In fact, they were kept out of this role that he has been playing. Would you speak to that, and whether, in fact, if that's the case, that he has had a direct channel to the president-elect and been presumably acting on his direction, whether some of the things that David posited, including the resupply of Israel, which I believe would be very strongly supported, certainly by Pete Hegseth at the Defense Department, and I think most of the rest of this team, might not go forward because, there needs to be further Biden-style, coercion of Israel to persist in honoring the deal, even if the haggling goes on, even if there's violations perhaps as well. Your thoughts?
That's really the problem. Fundamentally speaking, the America First administration should be putting America's national interest first. And the question is, what is America's national interest? Is it to maintaining this regime of deals, international laws, and an international order that Marco Rubio very ably denounced in his Senate hearing? Or is it actually empowering America, the projection of America's strength around the world? Getting into this idea of maintaining deals, of keeping up various arrangements with our enemies is exactly the kind of system that Rubio denounced. It's the kind of broken system that we've been doing for so very long. The Democrats had locked us into beginning after World War II, one in which our intervention in foreign countries, our intervention abroad, is largely aimed at maintaining the fictitious international order. And really, this is the idea of this deal. It's the international order on a smaller scale, one in which civilized countries have to make concessions to barbarians, one in which the key is to maintain this fiction that there is such a thing as international law. And really the question is, what is the Trump administration's foreign policy going to be? Who is going to control it? And what's the underlying worldview going to be? Certainly we have the question of bad actors going in. I've talked about it a little bit. Others have talked about it. Trevor has talked about it very ably thus far. We have a situation where we have foreign actors able to influence American foreign policy and getting inside the decision loop. And there are basic questions because that's an emerging narrative as to just how the so-called arrangement happened. But the stories that we've seen in the media have Witkoff repeatedly going to Doha, going to talk to the Qataris, meeting with the Emir of Qatar, and seemingly getting his marching orders from there. And the infamous incident where seemingly he makes an unscheduled trip to Israel on the Sabbath. Netanyahu tells him it's the Sabbath, it's a bad time to do this. And Witkoff supposedly says, I don't care obscenity about the Sabbath. But there was a Financial Times article which actually said that he does this after he has a discussion with the Emir of Qatar, and the Emir says, I'll pressure Hamas and you go pressure Israel. It's a very troubling situation because you have a foreign government talking to an American emissary and seemingly splitting up not just a foreign government, but one that is a state sponsor of terror that had involvement in September 11th, that saddled President Trump with the disastrous Afghanistan deal in the first place, giving marching orders or coordinating with an American representative. And there's no meaningful sign that Witkoff is coordinating with the Trump team. Seemingly there was he was keeping Mike Walls in the loop. Beyond that, there's really no coordination going on with the United States. Instead, he seemingly goes off to the Middle East. As Frank put it, he goes native. He doesn't actually do larger foreign policy coordination, and that is a huge problem because whose policy is this really? Is this Trump's policy? Is this Qatar's policy? Is this the policy of various interests? It's the policy. Certainly, we know it's the policy of Biden's people, with whom. People like Brett McGurk, with whom Witkoff spent a lot of time coordinating. So effectively what we have here is a foreign policy that is being hijacked. It's being hijacked by some of the same types of players who did it the last time around, which includes Biden's people. Before that, they were Obama's people. It also means that you have people who are going around seemingly working for foreign interests. Rather than for the United States. Witkoff has this extended relationship with Qatar. We don't know everything that it entails, but the bottom line is you bring in somebody who has a relationship with a foreign government, and then he goes off and sets the policy that foreign government wants.
Deeply troubling, to say the least. And it begs the question, I guess I'll put it to you, Trevor, and we'll ask others to respond as well. All of us have had some exposure to Donald Trump, obviously his 4 years as president. We've been hearing from him a lot, both in the course of the campaign and in the interval since he became the president-elect. Are you making book on whether Donald Trump will, in fact, stick with this seriously defective policy, this Biden policy, this Qatari policy, this China, Russia, Iran policy, because he went along with it. He in fact touted it in one of his recent pronouncements. Or do you think that he is susceptible, as he gets a team around him that I think is going to be very much of a different view with respect to aiding Israel, for one thing, of course, but also with respect to saving Hamas? What do you think, Trevor?
I think there's a war going on right now for capture of Trump's foreign policy. I think you have the people like Marco Rubio and Waltz who are sound. They understand what America's up against. I think there's that sector, but I also think there is the people that Tucker Carlson has brought in. I think there are people like Tulsi Gabbard who will absolutely feed into this capture of foreign policy if she is confirmed to a position of Director of National Intelligence. So I think it's an open question right now. I think Trump, as somebody said, Trump loves kids. He's probably swayed a little bit by what he sees as the horrific things happening to children in Gaza, which is, being played up in the media all the time. I think he's susceptible to this, and I genuinely think there is a battle going on by people who are sympathetic to Russia and the Palestinian cause specifically, who want to influence the policy, and I put Tulsi Gabbard absolutely in that camp, and those who, I think Marco Rubio and many others in the military, Waltz, who are much more realistic. So who wins is anyone's guess, but I think Trump will come out on the right side of this eventually. But I think and I'm hoping that America, the previous analysis that, after 6 weeks, Israel goes back to the job of eliminating Hamas and America backs them. I hope that's what's going to happen. But we have to understand that there are people around Trump who have a very different idea of foreign policy and what's American first than perhaps you or I would.
Thank you. If we have time, I'd like to come back and ask you to expand on the Tulsi Gabbard point, because her nomination has proven controversial in the Senate. She may not make it, I don't know, but I want to get a little bit more texture on this. But before we do, David, again, the question to you. If Trevor's right that there's a battle going on inside the administration, and that's the best case, I guess, at the moment. First of all, do you agree? Second of all, do you agree with his assessment that it will, in the end, probably come out right? And I guess I just would ask you to also comment on what should people listening to this webinar, what should Americans who feel passionately about not only the state of Israel and its survival in a very dangerous world, but also our vital interests in that part of the world, and for that matter, the fact that every single one of the people that are interested in destroying the state of Israel are equally interested in destroying us, from China, Russia, Iran, Turkey, right on down the list.
Well, first of all, I think Trevor's 100% correct, and I think there is a schizophrenia. Unfortunately, conservative administrations suffer this. I remember with Bush 43 when he took over, it was a schizophrenia, and it just keeps repeating. There is a fissure, and I think it is exactly along the lines of what Trevor says. And the problem here that we're going to have is that our enemies, that is China, Russia, Iran, and I would add Turkey, and of course Qatar, they're listening to our public debates, and they're manipulative. Their power is manipulation. So they're governing, they're sort of teeing things up, engaging in social media, funding organizations, and crafting the debate in a way that manipulates public opinion and people into thinking that they're America first, when in reality they're pushing their agenda. And there's a vulnerability here, a great vulnerability. I mean, we see it with Tucker Carlson, how the Russians kind of played him. We see it with the Iranians. They're looking very much. They know that President Trump has this great desire to show he's a tough negotiator. So they're trying to feed his desire to have a negotiation and say, well, our nuclear program, and this buys time and it stalls until they cross the threshold. So I'm very much afraid that there is this capable, highly manipulative aspect to the way our enemies are operating, and there are too many people surrounding the conservative side who are highly vulnerable to this. Now, that said, I think deep down Trump's instincts are correct. I think the fundamentally top-tier people, once they're in power, will get it right. Because the problem we're having right now is they're all in confirmation process, so they can't really engage. So neither Hegseth or Huckabee or Seth Gorka or anybody is in. It's only Waltz alone. And remember, Waltz has nobody under him. With Waltz, I would say one thing. I'm not sure I know much about his Middle East team that he's putting together, but that Middle East team has to be critical. It has to be, it's critically important. It has to be savvy, and it has to understand that Qatar, Iran, the Palestinians, they will manipulate you, and you won't even know you're being manipulated. So it's very important that the team gets in place and their deeper core values begin to really affect policy, and I think Trump's core values. So I agree with Trevor. Eventually, I think Trump will get it right. But there is a real concern. There is a real concern here. And we're seeing with the negotiations over this deal, and quite frankly, I'm a little bit afraid when he's talking about negotiating the nuclear deal or negotiating an onward to the Abraham Accords. He has to get this right first before he goes on any more negotiations in the region.
And you've made this point in a number of places, David, over the years, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this too, Daniel, that much depends on whether Israel is perceived in the region as strong and victorious, as well as enjoying the unwavering support of the United States, something that the last of those certainly wasn't true under Biden. Everybody understood that. But Daniel, would you comment on the bookmaking here about where Trump comes down? And again, if you have any thoughts on it, in addition to having discussions, very frank and I think very constructive, I want to say, conversations like this. What must be done by Americans who wanted to come out right to support President Trump in doing just that?
So President Trump is certainly not the first president to come in and believe that most things can be settled with deals. And there are certainly some things that can be settled with deals. But the key part that Trump signaled before his first term and before his second term is that you have to project force to be able to do that. You're not just going to be able to make deals by coming in. And there's been a bit too much happy talk on this note that you can say all hell will break loose and then a deal will be made. But it doesn't actually work that way. You actually have to be able to create leverage. And Trump's best leverage for making deals in the Middle East is Israel. It's other American allies. It's building an alliance where America does not have to say that we're going to come down and bomb your country because, A, frankly, we've done it already. And at the moment, the problem becomes that when we actually start dropping bombs, well, then we also get into the reconstruction business. We get into the negotiation business. So President Trump has a strong winning hand because Israel was actually winning. So he could actually use that as a projection of force. The mistake here was picking up the old Biden deal, one that was based on actually weakness, not strength. And that's really something that needs to be emphasized going forward because deals can be very tempting. But as I've said previously, bad deal is worse than no deal at all. We don't actually want to get into a situation where we are making commitments on behalf of the United States for doing things like the reconstruction of Gaza, because that is absolutely not what President Trump ran on. And I don't know if he understands that this is actually the commitment that comes with this agreement. So what has to be emphasized is that the United States should be avoiding any kind of nation building. And this agreement actually packages nation building in. It is ultimately, as I discussed at the beginning, a nation building agreement, one that not only is a return to nation building that we were trying to get away from, but actually nation builds on behalf of terrorists, on behalf of China, on behalf of America's enemies to weaken an American ally. So the projection of American force in the region is the projection of the force of our allies. If our allies can't project force, then we have to get into the business of projecting it for them, and that is always it's expensive, it's messy, it puts American lives at risk. And this would be the opposite of the kind of foreign policy we've had for a long time, particularly beginning with Obama, where Obama's idea of a strong foreign policy was to weaken America's allies, to weaken Israel, to weaken the Saudis, weaken Egypt. And those two are not necessarily great allies, but the point is they were countries that were in theory aligned with the United States. And, of course, that weakening resulted in the empowering of Iran and the conflicts we've been seeing ever since. So a strong foreign policy is one that actually lets American allies do a lot of the work in the region, that doesn't make America dependent on either nation building or on these weaknesses. So I think this needs to be communicated very clearly in a way that will be understood, because President Trump is not a traditional politician. He is not, he's coming, as David mentioned, out of the business world. He's coming from another place entirely in dealing with all this. And this is really not a business arrangement. In a business arrangement, you can negotiate a deal because both sides hopefully will benefit from that deal. That is not really how things work here. We do not want China benefiting from it. We don't want Hamas benefiting from it. We don't want a deal in which Iran benefits from it. What we want is a deal that America benefits from. And the deal that America benefits from is one that requires us to get as little involved as possible. It's a deal that allows us to project force without having to actually use force. It's a deal in which we are respected because we are capable of using force, not because we have to go around using force. And the paradox is when we actually weaken our allies, we are more likely to get involved in these wars. We're more likely to get involved in nation building. And when we get involved in nation building, we are in a forever war. So I think Trump has some very good people coming in on this national security team. These are hopefully people who will be able to make those points compellingly, because there will be people around them, whether it's Tucker Carlson, whether seemingly it's Witkoff or others. And not to mention there are going to be holdovers in the national security complex who are going to be making all the wrong points over and over again, who are going to try to sell him the same old bad policy, the same Biden, Obama, Clinton, Carter policies in a new gift wrapping, and try to pitch it to him as only you can make these bad policies work. Well, no, they're bad policies. Nobody could make them work, and nobody should try to make them work. The whole point of Trump coming in is that he can bring new policies to the table. That's what the American people voted for, and that is really what needs to be delivered.
Amen. Thank you. And I think your insight into nation building, this Palestinian state business, and rebuilding of Gaza and so on is exactly that. And Trump was viscerally opposed to it, and properly so, previously, and I imagine he would be now if they'll make clear that's what's afoot. Trevor, I do want to come back to you on Tulsi Gabbard. You have studied her closely as part of your research into people who have had very problematic associations in the past. It's interesting to hear you talk about her in this particular context. Could you just shed a little further light on some of your concerns about her nomination?
Look, I wrote a whole chapter about it in my book, White House Reds, back in 2020. But look, Tulsi Gabbard has worked with the hard Marxist left from 2012 to at least late into 2023. She was at the Rage Against the War Machine rally just over a year ago with hardcore Marxist, pro-Russian, pro-Chinese, pro-Hamas types. She is associated with the MAGA communist movement, people like Jackson Hinkle, who are actually pro-Russian communists, pro-Chinese communists, who are trying to infiltrate the MAGA movement. You know, she has defended the communist government of Venezuela. She's worked with Christine Ahn, who's North Korea's best friend in this country. She's worked with Democratic Socialists of America for many years. They helped to get her first elected. She was on the board of the Bernie Sanders Institute with several Marxists. And I saw her personally speak at the People's Summit in Chicago in 2017. And 3,000 communists there from Workers' World Party, Communist Party USA, International Socialist. She'd just come back from Syria, and she wowed them. She wowed all these 3,000 communists, just like she wows people today when she speaks at CPAC. She is a chameleon. She knows how to talk to people. And I would forgive this if this was all historic. But she is still working with these people today, and these same people are still promoting her today. Some of the MAGA communists are talking about the great advantages that would accrue to our movement should she become DNI. And this is within the last few weeks. You know, she is not to be, many of America's allies have voiced concerns about sharing intelligence if she is Director of National Intelligence. She'd be basically the editor of intelligence to President Trump. She could put all sorts of spins on things. I could go on for a couple of hours on Tulsi Gabbard, but not to be trusted.
Thank you. These facts will presumably be presented in the course of the confirmation hearings coming up.
I'm not worried about that because you get people like Ted Cruz, who should know a lot better, coming out in support of her. And we've been putting this information out a long time, and none of it's being raised by the people who should know about this.
I hope that one of the upshots of this very important conversation will be more will know about it, and that facts will be presented appropriately. Perhaps it was you, David, somebody mentioned, maybe it was Lee, that there is an incipient war was the word used, in Judea and Samaria, that the IDF now needs to be prepared to fight. Could you, whichever one you, I think it was David, add a little further texture to that, because this is a very, very unsettling further development.
There's two things going on. First of all, is that there has been a war been going on, but when you look at the images coming from Tulkarm and Jenin and Shechem, which is now called Nablus, and so forth, you see these armed bands of dozens, hundreds sometimes, heavily armed terrorists running around in their white pickup trucks. Tulkarm being only a few hundred yards from Israeli towns near Tel Aviv. It's on the coast almost. And Israel's looking at this, and this is Hamas once again. The second thing is that it's very clear that the Palestinian Authority, in as much as it's any use, which of course I don't believe it is, but it, in as much as it was any use, it was supposed to go after them, and they did because they attacked some Palestinian Authority units. The Palestinian Authority did send some units to try to crush one of those areas in Jenin, and they failed miserably. They were unable to do it.
Palestinian Authority's so-called security forces.
The ones that we've so much money. Money and weapons and training by the U.S. military and so forth, heavily invested in, were just completely ineffective. And against these Hamas, Islamic Jihad and so forth, who are essentially trying to bounce off of HTS and the Islamists taking over Damascus. They're trying to carry the momentum to take over the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian Authority was unable to do that, which now tees up the Israelis having to stop it. That's number one. Number two, unfortunately, as part of this deal, right off in the first phase, 1,650 hardened terrorists and fighters are going to be released to the West Bank, to Judea and Samaria, specifically Samaria. So Israel's essentially giving up the best fighters into the war that they're about to fight. So this is shaping up to be a major battle, and Israel is going to shift rules. They're not dealing with it anymore the way they've dealt with this for the last 30 years since Oslo. This is going to look a bit more like what happened in Gaza, where Israel's going to ask neighborhoods to be evacuated, and they're going to go in and they're going to clean it out thoroughly. Because one of the aspects of this deal is that taking hostages is now going to be the fashion internationally. It pays big time. It's a strategic weapon that works for people like Hamas. So you can count on the central aspect of what they're going to try to do is to take a hostage, a settler, an Israeli living in Jerusalem, take hostages and bring them back to Jenin and so forth. So Israel has to now wage war in Samaria in the next several weeks to ensure that that front shuts down before it gets much worse.
Daniel, let me close with you. Picking up on that point, I have been told that there's grave concern on the part of people living in those communities, so-called settlers, some of whom, by the way, have been pilloried and even blacklisted by the Biden administration. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, in just the past few days, there was a new executive order further expanding that policy. But they're very concerned because those forces that David was just talking about, the so-called good guys in the Palestinian Authority's security forces, who have been rather heavily armed, to say nothing of the jihadis that they're, for the moment, apparently failing to fight effectively against, and the arms they have, could put in grave peril these settlements in presumably much the same way that the kibbutzes near Gaza were. Hostages, again, being perhaps the least of the problems with just, sheer mayhem, murder, rape, and so on being what they might try to inflict first and foremost. Could you talk a little bit about this new front that is perhaps about to be opened in a very, very serious way, and not least this question of, can Israel annex these areas and thereby impose control on them in the kind of way that's going to be materially effective?
October 7th, Gaza were not separate phenomena. They're not separate areas. Really, we were seeing is the larger plan for Israel. Hamas jumped the gun a bit with October 7th. They overreached themselves. They had plans to link up with the West Bank, to link up with their supporters there and actually pursue an immediate goal of the destruction of Israel. They had maps drawn up and who would take over what. And there was an overreach at the time. They really overestimated how weak Israel was. But this is their long-range agenda. And it's important to remember that when it comes to discussing the so-called settlements, Israeli towns and communities and villages, they existed within Gaza as well. They were forcibly evacuated by a corrupt Olmert administration under pressure from foreign interests, with the promise, of course, that Gaza would be peaceful and it would be a very lovely place. And, there'd be industries, the World Bank would come in there, they would reconstruct it, and all that. Of course, it was taken over by Hamas. But this was really just the initial stage. The longer objective is to do the same thing with the West Bank, which is forcibly expel hundreds of thousands of Israelis, which would be really considered ethnic cleansing, turn over all of that area to the terrorists, and this would be Gaza on a much larger scale. It would be Judea and Samaria would become Gaza times 10. And this is really the larger agenda there. And the push for this deal is really part of that larger agenda, which is ethnically cleanse hundreds of thousands of Israelis, turn that area over to a state, one that is under UN recognition, that will very quickly form various security guarantees and alliances with Muslim powers, and that will then launch similar attacks, again, on a larger scale, because it's going to be harder to isolate than Gaza was, and because it has a border with countries that are even less stable than Egypt. As bad as the Egypt-to-Gaza smuggling pipeline was, Egypt at least is relatively stable compared to some of the what the border would look like as a result of that. So it's a major critical issue, and Israel has been stepping up, fighting against terrorism in a way that is similar in Judea and Samaria, in a way similar to the way that it's been doing before in Gaza, which is a recognition of the fact that you have heavily armed militias, many of whom have actually obtained their weapons and training from the United States, because the consistent pattern there has been that the United States has armed and trained the so-called Palestinian Authority police. Now, these are not police officers. These are not the British bobbies. They're certainly not, for that matter, even American police officers. They'd be the equivalent of SWAT teams in the United States. There was recently a scandal where the FBI Academy, Quantico, was awarding a certificate to one of these so-called police officers, and they announced him as being from the state of Palestine, which was jumping the gun a little bit, but shows where the agenda is. So these people are really more akin to paramilitary forces, to soldiers for that matter. They're heavily armed. They're not walking around just with handguns handing out parking tickets, and they're meant to be, again, and they have been in the past, the backbone of terrorist forces operating against Israel. And the argument for arming them in the past has been that they would actually keep the bad terrorists at bay. Since the Oslo Accords, it's been rather clear that they are the bad terrorists, that they occasionally fight each other. They may occasionally fight Hamas for power, but the bottom line is that they are a terrorist force. And that is what we are heading to if the deal continues. We're heading toward an expansion of the entire situation in Gaza within the West Bank, under international recognition, under a government which I said at the beginning, negotiated by Russia under the auspices of Russia and China, which will create a so-called technocratic government for public consumption, one that the United States will be obligated to pour billions of dollars into again, but behind the scenes will actually be run by Hamas and the PLO and Islamic Jihad and other various terrorist groups that together will team up to attack Israel.
To the benefit of China?
Of course.
And Russia and
Iran.
Their allies, Iran and other proxies. Gentlemen, this has been a fantastically impressive, if very, very troubling conversation. I think this is one of our best Committee on the Present Danger China webinars. And that's saying something. I believe we've had about 200 of them all told so far. And I want to thank each and every one of you for both your insights and for sharing them so compellingly. David Wormser, Daniel Greenfield, Lee Smith, Trevor Loudon, you are among the best of our team, and it's deeply appreciated that you would help comment candidly and I think constructively about what's just been done see if it is in fact finalized. But even if it's not, what has likely left an imprint on the incoming Trump administration, something that needs to be rectified at the earliest possible moment. And we hope those of you listening will take this to heart as a task. I think many, if not virtually all of us, very much hope for Donald Trump's success in office as president again come Monday, please God. And we want to make sure that a misstep here is rectified and work with those inside that administration and outside who are seeking to ensure that our friends in Israel actually do have confidence that we have their back and will be supporting them in the dark days ahead, and assuring that as they come out of it, they are able to play the role that we need them to play, not only as a powerful force for good, defeating our shared common enemies, but also to be the strong force in the region that will conduce to, I think, a much more promising future for people throughout the area. With that, I will say thank you to our audience. I will urge you, as Didi will also, to take advantage of this very formidable program when it is posted and share it with everybody you know, because we need their help as well. God bless you all. Thank you for joining us. Back to you, Didi.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks to everyone who's been with us today and to all of you who will watch it in the coming days. A video of this webinar will be posted to presentdangerchina.org within a day or so of the conclusion of our program. Please share this and our other programs with your elected representatives, colleagues, and other networks. Subscribe to our Substack at presentdangerchina.substack.com and follow us on X at CPD Join us again next week for another installment of our Committee on the Present Danger China webinar series on the CCP's unrestricted warfare against America and the free world, and how CCP captured elites betray the USA. Thanks for being with us today, and goodbye.